Hey everyone, welcome back to the Dairy Raid and the first morning walk and talk of the 2026 season. It's been almost 6 months since we've done a walk and talk. Not to say that I haven't been busy with the Dairy Raid, whether it be previewing the transfer portal additions, talking about the key off-season talking points, and then of course a lot of effort went into previewing and postulating about spring ball. And now here we are at the end of spring ball. Hopefully by the time this is posted, the Badgers will have wrapped up their last practice of the spring football season, I guess you could say. And we hit a critical junction of the season. As always, a perfect time to reach out to you, the Dairy Raid viewer and reader and listener, for your questions as a way to look back on spring ball and to look forward for fall camp. The weather is perfect. Spring has finally showed up in Denmark. So let's get into it with your guys' first question, and we'll do that right after I get through this tunnel. All right, so first question that I have is, how do you balance teaching football and coaching football, both personally and generally? And I really like this question because I don't think enough people realize the distinction between teaching and coaching. Teaching is a part of coaching, but they are two separate entities. So, what's the difference? We'll start with coaching. To me, coaching is a combination of all of the off the field management combined with in-game management and the work that it takes to get to that point. So, everything from scheduling to depth charts, to putting a playbook together, to installing the playbook, to calling the plays. To me, that's coaching. And teaching teaching football is the same as teaching anything. You are taking a player with a particular set of skills or knowledge base, and you're adding to that knowledge or that skill base. And with a less focus on winning a game and more focus on making that player a better player. To me, that is teaching. Coaching is everything you need to do to win a game. And you don't necessarily have to be a teacher to coach. You can have just good awareness, situational awareness, ability to manipulate players. It's the difference between being good at Madden and actually doing the real thing in a very broad, dumbed down version. So how do you balance that? Well, that really depends on your role within the team and how or what your goal is. So if I look for myself, I'm lucky right now that I am mostly in a head coach / administrator role. So I delegate a lot of the coaching in practice. I have my defensive coordinator who focuses on all of the off the field and on the field installation and play calling of the defense. I have a wide receiver coach who acts as my passing game coordinator. He helps me put together the game plan for the offensive passing game. Offensive line coach, we keep going like that. I still call the plays on game day. And in practice, with the exception of my time where I show up early to help kind of tutor a brand new quarterback with our junior team, our under 16 team, coach quarterbacks a little bit in practice, but when those players move off into their different groups, my quarterbacks do their indie period while the other players on the team are doing other work. I kind of bump around and I go through all the groups and my goal is to give a coaching point or a teaching moment to every position group throughout the week, and to watch my coaches coach so I have a good understanding of where my players are coming from, where my coaches are focusing their effort, and then that my players know my coaching personality, where I'm coming from, and more importantly, where everybody on the team is speaking the same language. And you've got to get the busy work done, you've got to get the installation work done, but every coach wants to be in a position where he's allowed to just relax a little bit and teach football. I think there is not a coach who cares about the sport who doesn't love teaching more than coaching. They're symbiotic. You have to do both. But just the warm fuzzy feeling you get when you get a kid who's never played the sport before, and in 6 weeks you're able to teach him how to play quarterback. Or you get a brand new player on a Tuesday and you can teach him enough where maybe he can participate in a game on Saturday. That's what I get to deal with, and that's some of the fun, unique things about my job. But you see it at all levels. So you've got to find the balance, and to me the balance is you have to teach enough to remind yourself why you became a coach in the first place. Wherever that balance fits for you is how you're going to settle things. If you don't need to teach to coach, I question your motives and why you're doing it, because to me that's where the fun part comes. All right, so I love starting off with kind of a philosophical question like that. But let's get into the meat of it. Obviously, I reached out and asked you guys for questions about spring ball, Wisconsin football in general, but spring ball. And so what's come up here first that we're going to talk about is one thing that has been talked about the first couple of years is depth. After spring, would you say this is the best depth across the board during the Fickell era? And I would say yes, with a but. I will say that maybe this team has the highest floor of any team in the Fickell era. There are no glaring disaster points that we're hoping aren't going to create bigger problems as the season goes on. There are problems. We'll get into that later. But the lower end of the roster is at a point where I'm not as concerned. To the point where we talked in one of the preview videos about the depth of the running back room. We're only going to have 5 running backs when Fat Boy Wiggins gets here in the fall. This spring, we learned we got 2 more in Harrison Bortolotti and Mason Lane, the 2 walk-ons. And that just shows you if the running back room is deep enough where your walk-ons are showing some ability, you're pretty set. Now, when I say that this team has the highest floor, where is the ceiling? Well, a couple positions. For example, I would say running back, offensive line, linebacker. This is also the highest ceiling. The talent in those groups across the board are solid enough that I don't think necessarily that the game plan changes much if any of those top 3 or 4 players comes out. You adjust the game plan, but you don't have to throw the game plan out the window like we have had to do at times when running back depth became an issue, when O-line depth became issues, etc. Now, there are other positions like quarterback that I think, again, this is the most solid QB room that we have had at Wisconsin. Oh, I'm going to get the sweater vest mad when I say this. This is the best depth in the quarterback room that Wisconsin has ever had. And the reason why I say that is, yes, Colton Joseph has been inconsistent in spring. And that is a whole separate topic. But from Colton Joseph to Ryan Hopkins, and maybe even all the way down to Carter Smith, we at least know what the offense looks like if any one of those 4 quarterbacks gets in. And there is a path to victory with all 4 of those quarterbacks. You could not say that, even the 2 deep, ever at Wisconsin. Can you name a 3rd-string quarterback that Wisconsin had before the Luke Fickell era? Can you name a backup Wisconsin quarterback that you would feel comfortable taking snaps? Maybe Bart Houston. You know, we could say Graham Mertz, that his true freshman year, but you get what I mean. We know that if any of those players came in, the offensive play calling and the offensive system is completely changing. So the depth in the QB room is the highest it's ever been. The wide receiver room, again, I think the floor is a lot higher. And I actually take it as a good sign that we are hearing every day in practice, we are hearing different receivers being mentioned. You're going to hear a couple that are getting praise more often, like Tyrell Henry. We've heard Shamar Rigby's name a few times. We've heard Zion Kearney's name a few times. But because that room, the floor has been raised, I am not so concerned about there being a number 1 guy. So the depth, I think, is there. Offensive line, I think, as well. And that has been the issue with the offensive line in the last few years. The issue had been we would have our starters and then we'd have to rely on redshirt freshmen and true freshmen because the upperclassmen depth that the offensive line coaches that has inherited at Wisconsin was terrible. And beyond the starter, there was nobody there. And I think just now we are catching up where that first recruiting class, those first recruiting classes are now your redshirt sophomores and true juniors. And then we have filled in with transfer portals at all age levels. So we have seniors and juniors and sophomores and freshmen and the redshirts in between, where every year going forward, if this trend keeps up, the depth is going to be where at least every position is going to have football experience. And I'm going to turn around and go back the other way because guy's mowing his lawn. Anyways, so I'm really happy with where the O-line depth is. And all of this put together offensively, I'm really happy where the depth is with the offensive line, or with the offense in general. Could it be better? Sure. Again, we're talking about raising the floor, not raising the ceiling. The ceiling is going to grow as this group grows together. I think the defense is already there, and the defense spent this offseason filling gaps, and they finally have got the system to where it needs to be, so they know what they're building. The experimentation, just defining what works with what. Again, the depth that was inherited and now that has been built. The defense is finally there. There are some people who are thinking we're going to have a top 25 defense. I don't disagree, without barring major injuries. So depth, I think, is in a good spot this spring, and definitely the best during the Fickell era. It's not saying much by saying that, but it is a step in the right direction. The investment in the offseason has paid dividends to fill in the gaps, and we should be set, at least numbers-wise, going into the season. All right, next question. If this season is, quote-unquote, successful, how many years does that buy Fickell? And that question is easy to answer. We won't know until we know who the new athletic director is going to be. If they do the Wisconsin thing and hire from within, and Marcus Sedbury does a good job and gets the interim tag removed and becomes the full-time AD, and the Badgers have a good season, or better season at least, Fickell gets another year. And he probably takes his traditional extension that all Wisconsin coaches get at the end of their seasons. The Badgers could come out and win 10 games this year. And if they hire Garrett Classy from Fresno State, Wisconsin native, worked in the Wisconsin athletic department earlier in his career, well, he's going to bring Matt Entz, his head coach at Fresno, a guy who came up through the North Dakota State system. I don't think it matters. He's going to bring in his guy. So it really depends on who comes in. And the more likely that a good season will buy Fickell more years is you look at the school that the AD comes from and how long that coach has been there and how the program has been in the time that he's been there. There has been names bandied about with the Northern Illinois AD or the Iowa State AD, both people with Wisconsin ties. If you look at there, Iowa State's just hiring a new coach because Matt Campbell went to Penn State, and Northern Illinois has hired a new coach late because Thomas Hammond, I forget where he went. He goes back to the NFL. He's not the head coach there anymore. Those are situations where, maybe they'll bring in a fresh guy, but they could also be in a position where they want to keep things rolling because the team did better. It is a big question, so I can't say that a certain amount of wins will guarantee Fickell more time. I will say, I think if he does a Tony Elliott fourth year resurgence after bigger investment in the NIL and program funding turnaround like Elliott did at Virginia from year 3 to year 4, I think that buys him faith, and especially with the players. I don't think Fickell's ever going to win back the sweater vests because he's too tied into McIntosh. He's too tied into everything that's gone wrong. He's the only reason why anything has gone wrong the last 3 years, and it's going to take Barry Alvarez coming back as AD and Jim Leonard coming back as head coach and Paul Chryst coming back as offensive coordinator for those people to get back on board. But if you can get 8 wins on paper, that should keep things going for sure for 2027. 7 wins, probably. 6, even if Sudbury is the AD, that's probably pushing it a little bit. But again, it's all going to come down to who the AD hire is going to be. And we're not going to know until that happens. And it's really awkward timing with the change in the AD that you can't really make that determination right now. All right, next up, and kind of a follow-up to the previous question. If we do have a successful season, what coaches would I be worried about losing and the impact that that loss will have on the 2027 season? I will say that as of right now, Luke Fickell's secondary hires have all been improvements on the previous one. And in the case of Eric Mateos, the third hire might be even better. Certainly looks like it so far. So, am I worried about the on-the-field impact? That if Kenny Guyton goes off to South Florida to be Brian Hartline's offensive coordinator, or Ari Confessor getting an NFL assistant, or NFL wide receiver coach job, or whatever. I think, one, if there are any coaches here that Coach Fickell is worried about losing, I think finally he's going to have the resources to try to keep them. And if he can't, I'm confident that he will find a suitable replacement. And again, we've had that so far when we've gone from Jack Bicknell to AJ Blazek, from AJ Blazek to Eric Mateos, from Greg Scruggs to EJ Whitlow, from Mike Brown to Jordan Reed, to Kenny Guyton to Jordan Reed. The list goes on. So I am pretty confident in that. Where the impact is going to lie is obviously if those position coaches move on to be coordinators in other places, especially places with deep pockets. Maybe they can convince some guys to follow. I'd be a little more nervous about maybe the inside linebacker room, because I think Tuff Borland has really done a great job as the true inside linebacker coach. That being said, that room right there is really tied to Luke Fickell, so I ain't worried about those guys leaving. Kenny Guyton goes off as an offensive coordinator. Somebody follows. I'd be more. I would suspect more that a Danny O'Neill or Carter Smith would follow him than Ryan Hopkins. So I think we're in a good spot. I'm not necessarily worried if anybody leaves. I'd really hope that if anybody is rumored to have teams interested in him, that if Coach Fickell and whether it be Marcus Sudbury or the incoming AD identifies that they want to keep people and they're going to do what it takes to keep those people. All right, and back to spring ball. And the next question is here, I'm going to make sure I word this right, is who is drawing your attention the most as spring ends? And who are you still wondering about, still concerned about? Well, let's start with the positive. We'll talk about the players. The ones that are really drawing my eye, and if you've been paying attention to my Twitter notes based off of the video evidence that we have seen this spring, I think, been saying it all spring, I think Jacob Harris is going to be a problem for Big Ten defenses. Just the size, the strength, the hands, and he's quick enough to make an impact, but more importantly, he has for sure won the trust of the Wisconsin quarterbacks, Colton Joseph in particular. He is going to be that safety valve that Will Pauling kind of was, where he could either be that first man in the progression, giving you that quick ball, or he can be the late man developing that if nothing gets open down the field, you can hit in the intermediate zone and behind the play. So Jacob Harris for sure. I'm really pleasantly surprised and happy to see that Tyrell Henry has been getting a lot of run with the slot position. I've been saying it, that since he came in, he offers the inside-out versatility that even though he is more of a prototypical slot, he has the inside-outside versatility that in 12 personnel sets, he can be on the field as that slot in a 12 personnel look, and also be able to be used in motion and even as a boundary receiver in one of those sets. So the fact that we have two receiving options right there who have, at least what it appears to have, secured the confidence of the quarterback, that is really positive to see. Who am I most concerned about? It's hard to place concern with as little evidence as we have seen. I would say, though, if there was a spring transfer period again, there would be a couple guys that I probably would have expected maybe look into the portal. But again, it could also be just the fact that we don't get much access. So it's hard to hear if people are struggling. Now, would I have liked to have heard Eugene Hilton Jr.'s name mentioned more often and seeing more video evidence of his improvement? Yes. Now, we've heard that early in the spring he was taking jet sweeps and showing quickness, which is awesome. We saw a couple route examples of him, which is nice to hear. But when we've been hearing down the field options in the vertical passing game, we have been hearing Shamar Rigby, Jalen DiMaggio, Zion Kearney. So that makes me a little bit concerned, isn't the right word, curious about what his role is going to be. I hope with how the reports are going that maybe the receiver room is truly 5 or 6 guys deep, and they're going to find a way to get as many of them involved as possible to, instead of finding the mythical number 1 receiver, you create the number 1, the number 2, and the number 3 receiver in the aggregate, which is something I've advocated for from the beginning with that room. So it's not concern, it's more curiosity why we haven't heard so much from certain players. All right, next up, this is not necessarily a spring ball question, but the NFL draft happens during spring football. So the comment is 6 Wisconsin high school players were drafted in the NFL draft. None of them were Fickell's guys. and the only one who actually played at Wisconsin transferred out. What does this say about Fickell? To this I say, the fact that we had, 10 players get UDFA offers and another 2 or 3 get training camp invites or rookie mini camp invites, despite having a 4-8 season, says a lot about what NFL general managers think about how Luke Fickell can develop players. Again, Luke Fickell put more players into the NFL during his time at Cincinnati than Paul Chryst did during that same period. You can look it up. It's true. But regardless, when you look at those 6 players getting to the NFL has way less to do with Luke Fickell and Wisconsin football in general than it does about college football as a whole. Because if you look at those 6 players, 2 of them Wisconsin never had a chance for. One was a Michigan legacy in Bredesen, who Paul Chryst didn't get his brother when his brother was a high-level recruit. You get the Ohio State offensive lineman, who Paul Chryst didn't land. You have Riley Nowakowski, who was a walk-on. And then you had a bunch of FCS and lower-level guys who, by the time they got to this point, had transferred up to schools like Texas Tech. And it is at this point, as you probably noticed, awkward end. Had a phone call come through. By the time the phone call was finished, I was already home. I didn't want to try to restage to finish up that thought. We're just going to wrap it up here anyways. Do I wish more Badger players from this class would have been drafted? Yes. It says as much about Wisconsin football and college football as a whole as it does Luke Fickell. So we're just going to leave it there. And I think with that, we are going to call it a day for this walk and talk and now sit on the couch as my cat is getting his lunch. And we'll save the rest for next time. Got a couple more questions and also some questions that were in my Football Explained, Football 101 buzzwords category that with the awkward end of this video, I don't want to try to restart the engine and get going. So we'll save that for the next video. So if you asked the question about the usage of coins to indicate defensive back groupings and the difference between end arounds, jet sweeps, and reverses, we will talk about that next time. But as always, thank you for watching. It's good to get back outside and get one of these walk and talks. Spring is over. Got a lot of content lined up to wrap up spring and look forward to fall camp. So we're going to have a lot to do between now and then. Thank you as always for watching, listening, and we'll see you next time.